Hello guys, it's me Lunar, welcome back to another PUBG PS4 and Xbox One video. Today we have our first new bi-weekly community update called the Dev Report. These are replacing the weekly community updates that we had over the last year, and we'll be going into more technical data, plus any news if we have any. This week's Dev Report is all about how the devs are working to improve frame rates. If the video is helpful, a like is appreciated. Players have been reporting frame drops, especially during late stages where there are frequent close quarter combat situations, and PUBG calculates resources of everything within the 600 meter radius of the character. This means wherever your character is, everything within the 600 meter radius of your character will be calculated. When we get to the late game where the zones shrink, players are focused into a smaller circle. This means that there are more players in the small circle that need their resources calculated. This is a similar case in hot drops as well, but late games usually have more resources needed to be calculated, as many of the players that reach late game are fully kitted out. Vehicles, outfits, weapon skins, and smoke are some of the many resources that are needed to be calculated in the game. To improve the performance then and reduce the rate of frame rate drops in these situations, the devs need to lower the resources needed to be calculated. And to explain further in their efforts to do so, you first need to understand view spectrum. The view spectrum basically means the angle of sight shown on the monitor. So if there's an enemy that walks in front of you and is shown on the screen, the enemy is inside of the view spectrum. This, however, does not mean that if something is to be inside of the view spectrum, it needs to actually be seen on the monitor. The direction and angle of sight are really what matters. So if a player is behind a wall that you're looking at, although you can't see them, they're still inside of your view spectrum. And what is inside of the view spectrum then is always calculated. This is why the character movement of your allies or enemies are always shown. To be as accurate as possible on showing character movement, there needs to be some predictive calculations from the server. Let's say a user A is moving in a direction. When the server gets the character location info from user A's client and sends it back, the sent location of user A would be the old location of user A, as the player would keep moving while user A's client sends the location to the server, and the server sends user A's location to your client. If the error between them is too big, this causes desync, and to be very accurate on character location, the server predicts the user's movement direction and speed to exactly tell where they will be. The server also predicts the location by checking the elevation of the terrain and whether or not there would be any objects blocking the player in that direction, for example a wall, and this has greatly improved the response time of character location to be more accurate and fix the desync issue. But to make an accurate prediction on the character movement, there has to be an increase in resources needed to be calculated, which are one of the reasons for frames dropping. To improve the performance, they reduced the process to remove the unnecessary calculations, and unnecessary components of movements have been removed. This has reduced the frame drops and improved the performance, and this shows the physics volume calculation time for each frame, and this was tested with 30 bots and compared the current build versus the improved build, which will be released in an upcoming update. The reduced time means there are fewer resources calculated, so there is better performance. And so you can see, guys, in the illustration on this graph, the blue line is the time needed to calculate resources per frame currently, and the orange is the new time in the upcoming update. And you can see a noticeable difference in those times. But that is only half of the story. What about outside of the view spectrum? Outside the view spectrum, you also need to calculate each of the character's movements. And so if there are 25 characters moving outside of your view spectrum, their movement was being fully calculated before, which means that a lot of calculations were needed, causing frame drops. To change this, they've reduced the resources being calculated regarding character movement outside the view spectrum by quite a lot. So there are two things to consider for character movement. There's mesh and physical body. Mesh is mostly related to the character's model and the sounds of footsteps and gunfire and things like that. The body is mostly related to the hit points of the character, and for characters outside of the view spectrum, they've decided to only update the mesh of the character location, so the physical body stays on the last location of the character on the outer view spectrum, and by only calculating the mesh, more than half of the resources calculated will be saved. And when the character looks back at the character outside of the view spectrum, the physics body location is joined back to the mesh location of the character, so rather than consistently calculating the physics body location, it now only needs to be calculated after the physics body location gets into the view spectrum. Depending on the mesh location of the character, the physics body location calculated could continue or not, as the physical body location stays the same and mesh location keeps on moving or not. When physics body location gets into your view spectrum, the physics body location is transferred to the mesh location. So if the mesh location then is not in your view spectrum, the body location stays at the spot until it gets into the view spectrum again, which is then transferred to the mesh character location. And that's a lot to take in, but this graph shows really what's important and all that, showing the physics volume calculation time for each frame after making these changes. Again, these were tested using 30 bots and is comparing the current build to an upcoming build with these changes of not calculating the physics body movement outside of the view spectrum. To conclude, the changes for both inside and outside the view spectrum will improve the performance by lessening the time needed to calculate player locations, and they've reduced the resources needed to be calculated, so less time was needed. With these changes, there will be a reduce in frame drops and will also increase the average frame rate. By how much, we won't really know until we actually test out the changes in the upcoming update. But they're not going to be perfect. The devs are still continuing to work on improving frame rates to make them higher and higher, which can only improve our experience. So guys, a very interesting dev report, and while we are always frustrated by lack of updates, it's good to see more detailed look into exactly what challenges the devs are facing to bring us these updates. It's also good to know the changes mentioned to improve frame rates are also being applied in an upcoming update. We always knew about graphic changes, but we didn't know anything about them applying these performance changes. So guys, let me know what you think of the new dev report in the comments. It's a lot to take in, but hopefully most of you guys understood exactly what I was talking about. Subscribe then for all the latest PUBG and Red Dead Online news and updates. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out.